Hey, before we launch into the scriptures today, I want to ask you to once again help me to promote this channel. It is something of a shameless plug. So if you would just take a second and like this video down below with the button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and then share these videos out on into the, now I guess we call it the metaverse. It's very meta. Get your coffee. One of the things that I have emphasized repeatedly when teaching through the book of Isaiah, which I have done quite a few times, both in church settings and also in Bible college settings, but one of the things that I have often emphasized is that when you read through the book of Isaiah, you find that God's punishment comes upon his people, but the purpose of God's punishment is purification. This is really important to remember because many people have a view of God that he is a mean and arbitrary judge in the sky. In fact, I recently was gathered with a group of individuals who have been affected by the addictions of a loved one in their family. And several of the people, when they were talking about God or their image of God, they shared that in their upbringing, they were given exactly this view of God. One person shared that God, as this person understood him to be as they were a child, was all about fire and brimstone. So they were afraid of God, fearful of God, and never wanted to come in contact with him. Perhaps that is your view of God. And it is understandable to a certain extent because some images of God in his judgment in the scriptures do portray God in that way. But that is not the total image of God as he is revealed in the scriptures. God, as he is revealed in the scriptures, he is Father, and he is a good father, a loving father. I realize that sometimes the image of father for some people kind of triggers them, and God as Father is not a great image, but he's a good and holy and perfect father. And good fathers do at times punish their children, and that punishment is supposed to be for the purpose of purification. The author of the New Testament book of Hebrews makes this clear when he writes, and he's pulling from the Old Testament, he writes this: "My son, do not despise the chastening of the Lord, nor be discouraged when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. If you endure chastening, God deals with you as sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? But if you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. Furthermore, we have had human fathers who corrected us, and we paid them respect. Shall we not much more readily be in subjection to the Father of spirits and live? For they indeed, the human fathers, for a few days chastened us as seemed best to them, but he, our heavenly Father, for our profit purges us or chastens us, that we may be partakers of his holiness. Now, no chastening seems to be joyful for the present. It's painful in the present, in the moment. Nevertheless, afterwards, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who are trained by it." The purpose of the Father's punishment is purification. Judah, during the time of Isaiah, was under God's punishment, and it was God's purifying punishment. In Isaiah's day, that purging fire came by the arm of the Assyrians, the Assyrian army. And God was not happy to judge his people, just as a good father is not happy when he punishes his children, his son. But the purpose of that punishment, it is to rebuke and to correct unrighteous behavior to the intent or for the purpose of bringing about training in righteousness. But of course, anyone that has been punished knows that punishment is not enjoyable. It's not fun. It isn't fun when you are on the receiving end of punishment. And I know, being a father myself, that it is not enjoyable or fun when you are on the giving side of punishment either. No chastening seems to be joyful for the present, but painful. But afterwards, if it is responded to correctly, it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Thinking of this word being trained, we got a puppy, a new puppy, this last Friday, and we've been planning on getting one for a while, but you kind of forget that a new puppy requires some training, some discipline, or else you end up with a dog that no one likes. Isaiah 27 pictures the people of Israel, specifically the people of the southern tribes of Israel, Judah and Benjamin, after the time of chastening that they were about to go through during Isaiah's time. So Isaiah is looking forward to Israel or Judah after their time of punishment. Prior to the judgment, we read in Isaiah chapter 5 that the people of Israel, they were like a vineyard, the vineyard of the Lord of hosts, and he had planted it and he did everything possible so that it would produce good fruit. But when he went to go see the fruit of it, he found that it produced wild grapes, sour, unuseful grapes that were not helpful. But in Isaiah chapter 27, Isaiah looks forward to Judah after the time of purging, after the time of a purifying punishment, their chastening. And he says that after this punishment, this will be the end of this vineyard of the Lord of hosts. Israel shall blossom and bud and fill the face of the world with fruit. So they were filled with unrighteousness. They were producing sour grapes, not good fruit, prior to the purging of God's punishment coming through. What was the unrighteousness of the people of Judah prior to God's punishment? Well, it was mostly idolatry. So God is going to bring a purging punishment, a purifying punishment to rid them of their idolatry. And Isaiah sees that here in Isaiah chapter 27. In verse 9, he says that God, through this purifying punishment, is going to take all of the stones that make up the idolatrous altars, and he's going to turn them to like chalk stone and break them up into dust. And then the wooden images of their incense altars to these false gods, they're not going to stand through his punishment, because the purpose of punishment is purification. So if it feels to you as though you are under some sort of chastening or punishment from the Lord, do not despise it. Do not be discouraged by it when you are rebuked by him. For whom the Lord loves, he chastens. And if you endure it, that chastening will produce in your life the peaceable fruit of righteousness. Something to think about. We'll see you next time.